Hey guys, big news dropped in the Alpha Clash world. So, for the next upcoming Clashgrounds, and it sounds like every event going forward, there's going to be these new Clashgrounds in play. And these Clashgrounds change quite a bit. They're just permanent start and play, stay and play effects that really change how the game's played. The one coming up for Pasay, I believe is how you say it, and Las Vegas is somewhere in, well, both those respective locations. And it says, once per turn, during your primary phase, if an opponent controls more resources than you may pay one resource of any color. If you do, put the top card of your deck into your resource zone. Now, if you've been playing Alpha Clash for a while, this effect of putting the top card of your deck into your resource zone, well, not even a while, just recently, is a very common effect. Or not a common effect, but an effect of a commonly played card, I Am Creation. And the reason that card is so powerful is because getting ahead on mana early in the game, getting ahead on resources, is just really impactful. And this lets you cheat on resources, but it doesn't let you do it to get ahead of your opponent. It's just anytime your opponent gets ahead of you, you can spend a resource to kind of catch up. And there's a couple things to note about this that are different from I Am Creation. The biggest one being it costs one resource rather than two. It doesn't cost a card from your hand. And the resource enters readied rather than engaged, so you can just spend the resource right away. Now, this is a really, really powerful effect, and I think it should change the way you deck build for these upcoming Clashgrounds and the way that you play. So I'm going to talk about I'm going to give my five biggest pieces of advice for deck building and playing in these upcoming Clashgrounds. So I'll start with number one, stop resourcing early. Now, normally in a game of Alpha Clash, you resource every turn up until like 6, 7, maybe even 8 resources. You probably don't skip your first resource. With somewhere in Las Vegas in play, or somewhere in Pasay, you're kind of encouraged to skip your resources later on. So, especially if you go first, honestly, on either side of the table, because if you go second and your opponent resources and you skip your resource, then you can just use this Clashground effect to get a resource from the top of your deck rather than spending a card from your hand. And the low cost of one resource to do so is not a big cost, and it lets you pull way ahead in card economy. So it's going to be important in games to consider skipping your fourth resource, maybe even your third resource, depending on what your deck is. And definitely you really want to be considering it on resources 5, 6, and 7. So yeah, stop resourcing cards early. If you're going first, then your opponent gets to take advantage of this effect. If you're going second, then that'll mean you'll get to take advantage of this effect. And that's just huge. You'll be getting resources for free rather than spending a whole card from your hand each time. Okay, so number two. To go along with number one, since you're going to stop resourcing earlier, you want to keep your curve low. And you might wonder, what does that mean, keeping your curve low? Curve usually refers to like the resource curve of a deck, how much your average card costs, how many cards you have at different cost points on your curve. And with these new Clashgrounds in play, you want to keep the amount of cards that cost 1, 2, and 3 a little bit higher, and keep the cards that cost 6 or 7 lower. Old favorites like the big 6-mana Flare, Machina that has Barrage. I should really have pulled up these card names. And Mean Streak, the 7-mana Mean Streak that was popularized in our Genesis deck at the Pro Tour. These kind of cards are quite powerful and will still be good, but you won't want to play as many of them because you're going to be skipping resources, honestly, as early as turn 4 sometimes. So definitely consider playing less of these and playing more cheap cards, and also try to round out your deck with cheap cards that can deal with these bigger cards, because a lot of the time the answer to your opponent playing a bigger card is playing a bigger card of your own. So just having more answers lower on the cost curve will go a long way, and you'll be making up for the card quality, because these expensive cards obviously are really powerful, they're really expensive, but just having more cards, because if you're skipping resources, you're not spending cards from your hand to resource, so you can just spend more cards to answer these cards and plot ahead in the card exchange. All right, number 3, and this one might be a little bit controversial, but I think you shouldn't play any ramp cards in your deck. The 2 ramp cards I'm talking about are Haven Bountiful Collector and I Am Creation. And these cards have been quite good in the past. They're basically the main reason that you'd want to play blue, is to get access to one or both of these effects. And I just don't think you should play them in this format. I don't think that means blue is a bad color, but if you're going first and you draw I Am Creation, then on your turn 2, you'll resource your second card and play I Am Creation. and that'll push you up to 3 resources, and you'll spend an extra card on that. And that gives your opponent the ability to just play a resource and then spend 1 resource of theirs to activate the Clashground and go up to 3 resources as well. And they'll also have 2 resources available, whereas all of your resources will be engaged. So it kind of just gives your opponent a window to just pull ahead of you, where they get to spend these 2 resources doing something productive when you spent yours to just put the top card of your deck into play as a resource. I think Haven Bountiful Collector is very similar. It's a similar play pattern where you will spend your second turn playing her and putting an extra resource into play, and your opponent can just then spend 1 resource to put the top card of their deck into play as a resource. And that's just not a good exchange, and you'll fall behind a lot by doing that. I think going second, there's some world where it might be correct to play these cards, but going second, if you play one, it just kind of like shifts the dynamic where now you're the person going first, and because you're up 1 resource, and then your opponent can then just skip a resource anytime they want and use the Clashground to kind of get a point of value on you, get a whole card of value on you. So yeah, you really don't want to be playing these ramp cards. They aren't going to really pan out very well, I believe, in these Clashground events. And yeah, so my next tip is try to play flexible cards. Now, because you want to stop resourcing early and you're keeping your curve low, suddenly that means the cards that you resource, you're just going to be resourcing less cards from hand each game. And you want to make sure that when you're resourcing less cards from hand, your cards that you don't resource, which is going to be more of them, they're all going to be playable and do impactful things, because if you have a bunch of situational cards, normally you could just resource them. You just take it, throw it in your resource zone, it's fine. You need to resource a bunch of cards in a normal game of Alpha Clash. But now that's all changed. So having cards that are like kind of narrow and answer specific things, like for example, accessory destruction, or honestly even some kinds of removal spells that you don't want to use in every game or every matchup, they look a lot worse now because you can't just throw them in your resource zone. Another one that players traditionally have played quite a lot of copies of and use those resources a lot is Clashgrounds. And if you're filling a deck with 8 Clashgrounds, once you play one, then all those other Clashgrounds you draw, they aren't very good, because usually as long as your Clashground sits in play, you don't really need to replace the Clashground. You just want it to stay there. So if you fill your deck with these Clashgrounds, then you can't resource, you don't want to resource them. I shouldn't say you can't. You don't want to resource them as much because you're resourcing less than an average game, and your hand can just get kind of clunked up with them. So try to fill your deck with more flexible cards when you can, and keep the Clashground count a little bit lower, and just have more cards that are all around more powerful for their cost and less situational than Clashgrounds tend to be. All right, and my last tip, number 5, is have fun. There's going to be a lot of cool brews at these tournaments, along with the bounties going around, where you're kind of incentivized to play these different heroes, because there's going to be an extra $100 for whoever does the best with each of them, along with a really cool promo. It's important to remember that Alpha Clash is a game, and the tournaments are there for having fun. And honestly, nobody knows exactly what's going to happen in these events. We can all do our testing, all play our games with our friends and our teams, and we'll see what happens. But ultimately, you won't know. None of us are going to know until the event. And going in with crazy high expectations of you're going to crush it because you follow these other 4 tips. It's really important to just make sure you're having fun. And one personal lesson I've learned over playing card games for the last 15 years, or however long it was since I first played Magic a long time ago, I always play better and deck build better when I'm having fun. And it makes sense, because if you're having fun, then you're just more engaged and honestly more invested in the process. You just want things to work out better. So those are my 5 tips for the upcoming Clashgrounds in Las Vegas and Pasay. I hope you all have a great time deck building and brewing for these events and testing for them, and of course playing in them as well. It's a really cool change in the rules, and I'm really excited to see how it plays out. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you all in Vegas. And that's all for now.